Welcome to another episode of Frontline Baddies. This is our second episode that we're doing, so very, very exciting stuff. Before we get into the episode today, I would like to take the time to say that Frontline Baddies operates off of the north of Turtle Island. We strive for decolonization, land back, and acknowledgement of continued colonization through the Canadian government. We are a group of humans that are Indigenous, refugee, immigrant, and settlers to Turtle Island. We acknowledge our ancestors' plights for us to be here. We acknowledge our siblings' trauma in this line of work. We did not choose it, it chose us. So, with us all here today, with you here today, my name is Danny. With me on the couch is my dear friend Eileen and one of the co-founders of Frontline Baddies. And then all the way in Alberta, we have Tracy, who is also joining us on the podcast today. So just wanted to introduce everyone and say hello, and then I want to pass it over to Tracy to give us a good, solid frontline worker welcome.
So something that my nonprofit and my team likes to do before we start meetings or have any type of sit downs is we like to ask questions around motivational interviewing and kind of just do a little bit of a check-in before we get started into anything that's like a heavier topic. Since today we are talking about misconceptions of frontline work, we do want to discuss what that looks like for all of us around this table and what that is, right? So the question that I have created was, we know there's a lot of misconceptions around frontline work. What is the misconception you hear the most, and why is it upsetting?
Oh, okay. So the one that bugs me the most is the one where people think that my job is basically to encourage and enable all these negative habits, and like basically not doing actual work to help people out of their addiction. Yeah, basically just shitting on my job and not understanding what I actually do and like seeing the bigger picture of what harm reduction does for our society.
My turn. That was a really good one, Eileen. I think you stole mine, actually. Rude. Let me know if you think this is also like a common misconception for you. But I feel like when I talk to people about, my line of work as like a frontline worker, it's always seen as like temporary, where people are always like, it's like when you get your first serving job and they're like, what's your real job? What are you really going to do next? Or like, you know, what are your life goals? And it's like, well, my life goals are to help people. Like I'm doing my life. Like, what do you, what do you mean? Yeah, that gets under my nerves a lot because taking a passion that someone has or just completely devaluing someone's work uh, in such a quick negative. Obviously you have a different, not even, it's not even really a question. It's just kind of, you know when you get another job, what's that going to be? And it's, oh, it just feels so awful. And then obviously that paints a picture of what they think about the communities that we serve as well, if that's how they think about the workers in that field. So just immediate red flag, immediately know when I hear that sort of dialogue happening.
Yeah, no, that's something I definitely have gotten as well. Like, actually, I got it a couple days ago where, like, you innocently kind of ask people, like, oh, what's your end goal? Like, what's your big goal here? And I'm like, what are you talking about? I work at the shelter. And they're like, yeah, but like, what's after that for you, though? Are you going to go into management? Are you going to be a coordinator? And
Are you
like,
in school?
yeah, like just questions like that where it's like, well, what do I need to be? Like, do I need to be aiming for management positions? Like there's a lot of values in the actual frontline work and like being in the shelter and like not being involved in management. Like there's so much value to that, and I wish like people would acknowledge that.
Mm.
Because like frontline workers are what's keeping the community together, basically, right? Like they're the one that are like running the show, and like to be like, well, what's next for you? Are you gonna go into management? I don't know. It kind of makes it kind of like belittles.
It's demeaning and condescending. And those are the pieces that are that's frustrating for anyone, right? Like it doesn't matter what like sector you're in. Like Danny, you made the point when I was a server, it's kind of the same deal, or when I was a bartender. And most people don't realize how much bartenders make. Like, I don't think you'd be telling me that if you knew how much a bartender makes. Like personally, I don't know. Like bartenders make more, like as a bartender, I was making more than what I'm doing now, and I am a leader in this line of work. I think like a misconception that riles me up the most, and it's kind of in vain, Eileen, with yours around the enabling, is that like I'm letting individuals who have committed crimes and I'm giving them a second chance. And I'm like this horrible human for supporting someone who has hurt someone else. And that was really hard for me to stomach, like working in the justice sector with youth, because a lot of these kids, like all of the kids, are victims themselves, right? So, this idea or this mentality that like they don't deserve a second chance when they're 14 years old because they harmed someone, because that's what they learned to do because someone harmed them, is really just a kind of a difficult pill that comes up every now and again when people ask me what I do, and I'm not a big fan of it. I gotta say, not a big fan of it. Makes me feel a type of way. It's hard to keep your calm.
Is gatekeeping who can or deserve like support and resources, like just us being like, oh, you're a good person. Yes, you deserve housing and food and harm reduction supplies, but oh, like you have a history of this and that. No, you don't get any of this. Like,
That's such an interesting thing around deserving. Like, who deserves to have basic human rights
who's to say
met?
who is like
Who's to make those determinations of who's deserving enough, you know? You don't have a home, you're no longer deserving of XYZ. It's just, that's a very like impactful statement to make about all of that.
It's this colonized way of thinking of like, we're not going to give people a second chance. We're not going to give them the support that they might need or the community that they might need. Um, and when you're looking at these stats, especially within the justice system, the majority of individuals, like children in prison in Alberta right now, have FASD. Like it's over 80% of them have fetal alcohol syndrome disorder, which is not something that they could even have control of. It's just that their neurodivergence is not allowing them to live a lifestyle that coincides with what the rules are in place for society as a whole, or they don't understand those rules. And because they don't understand those rules and no one has taken the time to teach them in a way that they understand due to their neurodivergence, now they're in jail. Like, truthfully, right? And that's not even what the Youth Criminal Justice Act is supposed to be. So it's not just like giving people the unwillingness of giving people a second chance or who is deserving or who is not. It's like a whole systems failure that really irks me. And then people come along and are just like, oh yeah, you you're giving these kids a second chance and you shouldn't be, because they just deserve to be demonized the rest of their life for something that was way outside of their control. It's kind of wild, truthfully.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. How are we feeling? Do we feel like we want to
um
get into it?
there is something that I would like to acknowledge. Like, I think the misconception of like what we do as frontline workers and what we're contributing to the field, because I think the general public think that our number one goal is to help these folks get stable and get sober and get into treatment, when in reality that isn't our number one goal. Like, it would be nice, yeah, if we can get people into treatment and stabilize and get the mental health help that they need. But I think a large piece of it is needs to be talked about in terms of like meeting people where they're at, because truthfully there are so many folks out there who probably will never be sober in their lifetime, and that's a hard pill to swallow for a lot of people.
Mm.
Is the radical acceptance that there are people who don't want to be sober and shouldn't have to be coerced into be sober in order to get services and housing.
Well, I mean, Eileen, you make a really good point around the sobriety piece, right? How many people who would argue that they're not drug users and that they don't have addictions and they don't have problems, how many of those same individuals are binge watching TV? How many of those same individuals are going on shopping sprees that are well outside of their budget? How many of those same individuals drink energy drinks or caffeine every single day of their life and go through withdrawal if they stop drinking it? Like the idea, even around sobriety and substances and what drugs, that inherent level of what drug is an acceptable drug to take. Like we have bars with alcohol. Why is it okay for us to have a bar where people can go and drink and become, not sober, but it's not okay to have an injection site so people can go and do the same thing there and not even stay for hours at a time, just use, get up and leave. So like what? You're 100%, you hit it.
Because people hate poor people. At the end of the day, it's only okay to be like an alcoholic if you have housing and have money to go home to. But the minute you are houseless and have nowhere to go and like you want to use alcohol, it's suddenly trashy and you issues and you're marginalized. Like it's at the end of the day, it's just about hating poor people. Um,
Yeah, and I think so much misinformation is out there around, people in poverty and people struggling with whatever it is that they're struggling. I mean, addiction a big forefront of that, but also mental health concerns. And yeah, it's, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and everyone can help themselves and all you have to do is work harder and try harder and it's just so silly now, and it's silly looking back on it now and other interactions that I've had, and even information that I was fed prior to getting into this line of work. Like, that was the rhetoric. That was the narrative that was being fed, especially in schools. It was, "Don't do drugs. If you go do drugs, you're gonna go to jail and be a horrible person and be poor, and then society's gonna hate you." So, yeah.
and like they're all gung ho about neighborhood pubs and like bars and because it makes people money and but the minute you think about a safe consumption site that includes like injection and smoking and whatnot, suddenly the quaint little neighborhood is going to be riddled with crime and poverty and there's going to be dirty needles everywhere and kids are going to trip and fall on the needles like it's that's what they picture, but at the same time it's a misconception. Like instead of saying bars and pub, I'm going to start saying drinking consumption sites like supervised drinking consumption sites, and they're going to be like, what's that? I'm like, that's a bar, that's a pub.
Well, like truthfully, and like as we talk about that sobriety piece as well, this idea of pulling yourself up at your bootstraps, white knuckling it. Like I always love those individuals when they come up to me and they're like, "I don't like what you do," da 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 da, da," and then they get on me. Like when I go to a party or whatever, and it comes up, "What do you do for work?" Right? Like just even that question is such a heavy question to try to navigate as a frontline worker because it's so politically charged and you know it.
It is, yeah.
Mhm.
You know it as soon as it's asked. You're like, do I tell you the truth or do I just lie to you in this moment? Because I can kind of already tell where that conversation's going to go. And like, I'm not here to fight about politics. I'm here to try to like relax and have a good time, like outside of what I do for work, which is very stressful. But those individuals, I always like to be like, oh, so we're having this discussion, but you're not sober yourself in this discussion, like in this conversation. You're telling me that you expect everyone else to be sober and you expect them to like not use the substances they're using while you're not sober yourself. Like the hypocrisy in that is wild to me. And I don't think I really can stand it anymore. And even with homes, like we have We have enough resources in this day and age that everyone could have a home, whether that be in an apartment or a room or whatever. And in Vancouver, you see it where, I mean, Vancouver had to start charging people if they weren't letting people rent out their homes because all of these landlords had many homes under their names, and yet the homes were sitting empty. And Vancouver's going through their housing crisis. And so then Vancouver City's response is, well, we're going to tax you if you're not living in that house. And if you're not renting out that house, you're now going to be taxed. And it's like, exactly, we have the space for it. And yet why are people having to live on the street and having to live in negative 35-degree weather out here in Alberta? Like, what? What?
So we're talking about housing, and I think that's a really great place to start. There's some questions that we want to get through and talk about. Some of them are going to be myths around frontline work. First one, harm reduction in housing first as being enabling. Eileen, what are your thoughts on this? On this myth, on this misconception?
I have many thoughts about this. Well, first of all, it's weird and makes me very angry when people like gatekeep housing. And because I'm like, who are you to say who deserves housing and who doesn't? And I think it's like a basic human right, in my opinion, to get to have housing, and not just housing but like dignified housing as well. Like, just because you're like low income or in active usage, like, doesn't mean that you only deserve a crappy little shack with no running water. You know what I mean? Like, the misconception that harm reduction is enabling is often misconstrued because they don't know what harm reduction actually is. And I don't know, I think it's wild to me that people are out there saying all these things with their full chest, but then not actually taking the time to like look into what harm reduction actually does and is all about. You know, they hear like certain words that are new to them and are scary, like supervised consumption sites. In their mind, it goes again, like what I said earlier, their mind immediately goes into their quaint little happy family friendly neighborhood, going into violent crime and just deterioration of their happy little life. I don't know if that makes sense, but it just makes people uncomfortable, and like they're like, that's not normal, and suddenly they're just against it without actually educating themselves around what harm reduction actually does for our people. Yeah, when people hear that I work in harm reduction, they automatically think that I'm like going into like schools and teaching these toddlers how to shoot up. I'm keeping people alive, basically, and supporting them through things that are realistic and inevitable in life, such as drug use or substance use, however you want to put it. Because, like, we've seen it. The thing is, like, harm reduction is evidence based, and it has been proven to keep people alive. Like, they've been doing it in Europe for like a long time now, and yeah, and in Portugal. I don't understand why we don't just look at how they've done it and like see like the positive results that have come out of harm reduction and apply it to our own people. But it's like associating harm reduction with enabling. So the minute they hear harm reduction, they're like, nope, nope, we're just enabling these people, and that's not what we want to do. Like, put their fingers in their ears and like go la la. And it's honestly just ignorance, and then the decision to choose to continue to be ignorant instead of like looking at these evidence-based practices.
Absolutely.
Danny, what's your opinion on this myth, harm reduction and housing first as being enabling?
Yeah, I mean, so many points that Eileen just like nailed on the head, which is great. Uh, I kind of want to draw my perspective off of a conversation that I actually had with someone in my life not that long ago. The Harm Reduction Nurses Association, And there was a bunch of things happening in BC where they were trying to essentially dictate where people were going to be able to use like outdoors after decriminalization. And it sounds like the court has like put it off for however long. But this person in my life was like, well, yeah, we have to make the streets safe and they can use anywhere now and da da da. And I was, looking over kind of what the proposal was, and I'm like, but this isn't leaving a lot of places for people to use if they don't have housing. And the person was like, well, I'm not saying that housing isn't something that we need to work towards, but what do we do in the meantime? I said, well, giving anybody no place to go in the meantime of trying to get them housing doesn't even make sense. That sentence doesn't even make sense. And just a lot of back and forth with this person. And obviously, neither of us were going to be seeing eye to eye in that situation. But I think that's part of the whole, seeing as enabling is if we're going to continue to aid people and provide harm reduction, evidence based work for these people, anybody, I keep saying these people, like I wasn't one of those people because I was. I don't know. It's so aggravating. And to think that there are people that are using substances in their homes, they have a roof over their head, they're using, and that's fine. But as soon as someone steps out of their own home, it's not okay. But then the solution is not to get them a home. The solution is just for them to have to fend for themselves or go somewhere else where it's acceptable. But no one's making it acceptable. So I don't know.
Like
It's
people are
just,
constantly complaining about all these issues, and it's like we have the solution to it. It's housing first and harm reduction, but then they're like, no.
And it's cost effective versus what we're doing right now. Running these programs is not cost effective long term, but like if you actually put housing first in place in sustainable ways, it is more cost effective long term on healthcare, on justice, on our paramedics, like on all of these systems, you know.
But
and
instead they'd rather like throw money away on short-term solutions that are like very cruel.
I was going to say, are they even really
Sorry,
solutions? Because,
the
like,
air
nothing,
quotes, the
air quotes.
solutions, because they're not solution. They're
I was gonna say, or we're throwing money away on that like giant chandelier. How many millions of dollars was that giant chandelier that hangs under a bridge in Vancouver and doesn't even function properly anymore? Oh, Danny, do you not know about the chandelier? They commissioned this artist to do the chandelier, to create this huge ass chandelier, like at almost as big as like the room I'm currently in right now. Okay. And on this chandelier, they have all of these little working pieces, and it comes down and it spins and then it goes back up. And it was, I want to say $4.2 million for this one chandelier that the majority of Vancouver doesn't even know exists because it's under a bridge in a space that many people feel is unsafe.
it's scary. It's like a bunch of shards of glass spinning.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Needles are not good on the ground. Spinning shards of glass, much safer, much better for the public.
Yeah.
It stopped working within like a year of installation, and then to have to change out the lights was going to cost money.
So it wasn't even done well.
But like seriously, the city is spending money on that, and I wrote a paper because I was in some form of diploma at that time, and I wrote a paper on it. And for that amount of money, and for how many homeless individuals or houseless individuals we had living on the streets at the time, that would have given all of those individuals homes.
Vancouver is not cost effective. They're actually very good at wasting their own money and then blaming like our folks for wasting their tax dollars because we're needing to access like resources. Like make it make sense. I don't
Make it make sense.
So like my take, and it's probably going to be a hot one, and I know it might, so I'm sorry. I don't want to inflame you guys before we really even start getting into all of these myths, but I don't know. Um, I'm pulling up the definition of enabling on my phone right now, and it's give the authority or means to do something, making something or someone operational. So in our line of work, enabling is like a very negative word. And I understand why, because, we're talking about people who are using substances, and people are afraid of death and overdose. And when you're a family member of an individual who is using and who is stealing from you and like that, it's a lot of pain. It is a lot of pain to go through. And I want to acknowledge that, because I have been on that end as well as the other end. And I get both sides quite well. But I just also feel like enabling is a neutral word. Like, we enable students to go to school and study, and we never think twice about it being a negative word. And yet, when we say the same of helping individuals who are houseless or who are struggling with their use, or who might even be using dangerously because their mental health is just so impaired, that the same word is considered negative and is considered this, like, this, like, I don't even know if YouTube is going to allow me to say it, like a demon in the closet, right? Like, it's this, like, we're bad people, morally defunct, because we're helping someone who is struggling. And that's all enabling really is. So I would argue we do enable. But with that enabling, I would also say, like, if we're going to talk about it, we enable people to stay alive. We enable people to be safely housed without worry or fear of physical harm coming to them. We enable people to have their autonomy and have their voice heard and have their choice of what they want to do be represented and respected, because ultimately it is their life, and we give them that agency, and we enable that agency, which actually turns for better outcomes. Hello, high fidelity wraparound, right? Like, there's literally a process just for that alone. And if that makes an average citizen mad that we enable, I don't care. Like, truthfully, I'm to a point where I don't care, because someone's life is more important than their sobriety. Them being alive is more important. I will enable that person to be alive. I get it if you are a loved one of the individual who has an addiction and who has been really, really hard. Their struggle has been hard for you to stand by and live by and see that person deteriorate, especially when they're a loved one. I 100% understand it in such an intimate way, but you don't want them dead either. And word the difference between sometimes them being dead or alive. And to then come down on us and say that we're enabling and that we're these, like, big bad monsters for helping these individuals just stay alive is wild to me. Because, like, it shouldn't we be doing that? Like, shouldn't we just be caring for other people? And if you're a personal loved one, like, yeah, sometimes you don't have that capacity. Like, sometimes you don't have that patience and that love, or you don't have the skill set to be able to do that, but we do. And like, it's not even a but, and we do. So if you need to tap out and tap us in, that's what we're here for. And without fear, without worry of your person dying, because there's someone there trying to help them in a really hard time of their life. Like, why is that a bad thing?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And yeah, those are like,
100% agree.
I almost cried. Like, as someone who's overdosed twice and, like, got very, very lucky with who was around me at the time. So I'm still here today, and, like, who's had many family members die from opioid overdose. Like, I would have much rather all of my family members had someone there to help them in those moments than not. And so, like, this myth around enabling for harm reduction and helping people stay alive, whether that is by giving them a home to live in so they don't die, from, negative weather conditions or whatever it might be, or other people. Like, it is so dangerous being a woman on the streets. Like, and that's very rarely discussed, but like, that's truth, right? And I would much rather every single day enable someone to make sure that they don't die than not. And I say that with my full chest, and I'll continue saying it with my full chest until the day I die.
Like I never really thought about the word enabling to be neutral. And when you read the definition, I was like, that's what we're striving for. And yeah, if you're gonna call me an enabler for doing it, I'm an enabler. And I'm proud to be an enabler. Right? So for me, a couple of weeks ago when I was working at the youth shelter, I had a mom drop off her kid, and she confided in me a little bit about how it's stressful being a parent to a youth who is like deep in their addiction and deep into like living on the streets. And what she was struggling with at the time was her family members and friends were telling her that she was enabling her daughter by bringing her food, bringing her warm blankets and jackets to her, or just providing things that she needed in whatever she needed, right? And a lot of her like supports were telling her, you're enabling your daughter, you're making it too comfortable for them to be living on the streets. How is she gonna get out of her addiction or get off the street if she is too comfortable? And it basically they were shaming her for like keeping her daughter alive. I don't know about you, but like no matter how many blankets and warm food you're gonna bring me on the street, it's never gonna be comfortable living on the
Tell me you've
street.
never lived on the street with
Exactly.
telling me you've never even been on a street before.
Like, do you think this youth is on holiday, vacationing on the sidewalk? Like, no, they're like bringing her kid all these things when she needs it is literally just keeping her alive.
Mm. It's like basic necessities. It's not even like, I mean, if you want to argue, it's not like the mom was even like providing anything harm reduction based that a lot of us do in our work. The mom was literally just like, here's a blanket so you don't freeze to death living on the street.
Yeah.
And that's like you're enabling that person. It's like, well, then I'm gonna enable for the rest of my life then.
So this mom is feeling so like defeated and ashamed because her friends and family are telling that she's enabling her and that she's the one that's causing her daughter to be out on the streets. We need to like, stop the whole like stigmatization of enabling.
Absolute beauty that woman is, though. Like, truthfully, like, to know that your child is struggling and all of the things that come with that as a parent, like, um, the stress and the worry. Like, anyone who's listening to this who is a parent knows what I'm about to say. You are constantly worried about your child. It is not just a like flitting little like, oh, I wonder if they're okay. No, it's a constant. No matter where your child is, or like where your child's at in their life. Like, my mom still calls me and tells me like, I was worried about you today, like, da 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 da, you didn't respond the way you normally do, or whatever, right? Like, moms care so deeply and hold that emotional labor that they do for their children in such a large way, and so do fathers. But like, we're talking about a mom in this instance, and like, what a beautiful human to just like know all of that struggle that she is going through, and like the pain and the worry, and still showing up for her child any way she can, and then to be land blasted in that way by someone is so disheartening to hear, because I would do the same thing as a mom. Like, if my kid wasn't staying in my house, I would be like, where are you at? Let me meet you where you're at, because you need something. Like, there's something here that you need. And obviously my house is not the place where you're getting it, right? So I don't know, just freaking kudos to that mom, because it's hard. It's hard being a parent out here. And you got to worry about finances. You got to worry about feeding them, their mental health, if they're being bullied or not. You got to worry about their education and what that looks like. And when you have a youth who's in active use and who has like severe like mental health stuff going on as well, those worries just get amplified. that education piece. Will they ever have a career? Will they even be employable? Like, that's such a huge worry for parents who have children who are neurodivergent, because of the state of like how expensive it is to live. And they don't want their children to have to be on some sort of medical, EI or AISH or whatever, disability. They don't want them to be on disability long term, because they know disability won't give them a a, a great life, right? Like it lets you live like your baseline of survival. So just freaking shout out to that mom, because she's amazing.
I think shout out to like frontline moms that are like doing the best that they can for their kids. I don't know. I've met a lot of parents. Maybe there are a lot more barriers for them in accessing, you know, the empathy that they need for a community of people to be able to see past that to help their children. So the moms that are the frontline moms that are kicking ass, shout out to you, because that's amazing.
100%. There's enough self blame. They don't need people in their lives to be blaming them for what their kids are doing. And
no, they're trying their best. They're out here, like they're out here trying their best, just like anyone else is. And I mean, I always find it funny when I'm working with someone, and I work with teenagers, right? And when someone's like, oh, like these kids are behaving so poorly, like they're throwing eggs, or they threw a condom with water filled in it at me, and da da da, and then they just go off, and I'm like, I'm sorry, you're complaining about them being teenagers? What? they're having they're not doing real harm, they're having fun, like they're being teenagers. Like, do you know how hard it is to raise a teenager? Their hormones are everywhere, they're so emotional, and they have absolutely no filter.
yeah, you're probably your most unhinged self when you're a teenager, like, and to expect your best behavior constantly without factoring all that stuff, hormones and mental health and societal expectation, da da da. Like, it's so hard being a teenager. It's so hard.
And then when you add on to that, drug use for that parent, I've seen it, like, you know, running the stabilization program that I have for the amount of time I have, I've seen many parents who are just like, I don't even know. Like, I don't even know what to do and how I can help them, because I've gone to all of these places, I've done this research, and they are like clawing at anything they can find, anything, and that's the piece that hurts me. It's like there truly aren't enough resources, and we have these amazing people that want to help their kids and just can't, because there's not more resources to help their individual kid when we have comorbidity issues, right? I mean, we just saw that in Vancouver. The comorbidity treatment center got shut down for youth. That was, what was that, 10 beds? That was almost half the beds in Vancouver for treatment. Not to say that kids should go to treatment or have to go to treatment, but like, we're sitting here saying that as a society that we want to make sure kids aren't doing these things, but then you're going to take away half of the treatment beds in one city. That isn't just helping that one city, but all of, the area around that city. I don't know. That's wild to me.
That goes to like a lot of like that goes to say the same about a lot of the things that we deal with in our field. It's like these are the expectations that we want our folks in the community to achieve, but where's the support? Let's just cut, and then they cut funds and they cut resources, and then but then the expectations is still there. Like, I don't know how you're supposed to self care yourself out of trauma and homelessness and mental like severe mental health issues.
Yeah.
I don't know if somebody has the answers. Let me know. But like,
Leads into the next question that I think that we should talk about. A little myth here around harm reduction. One being when people say things like, my tax dollars are being wasted on drug users and houseless people to keep the housing industry going and people in jobs. Tracy, please tell us what you think.
So I always find this to be an interesting myth. And you're going to see me on my phone. You're going to see me with a piece of paper because I want to spit facts, and I can't do that off the top of my head right now due to trauma brain. Even if dollars don't go to like substance users or houseless people, they're always going to go into the Canadian health system, social services, and the justice system. Insight has proven over the last 20 years that it saves money in the health system by lowering bloodborne illnesses and the transmission of them. And when I say money, we're talking about $17 million in the last 20 years. And this is just HIV. That's it. This is not including, the money it saved police. It's not including any other bloodborne illnesses, not to mention the amount of money it saves every day currently not having to call paramedics for overdoses. And we're not just talking about money there, we're also talking about other people's lives. Because if paramedics are constantly responding to overdoses, it means they can't go to other places. Like when people have heart attacks because they're responding to overdoses, that's also harming people. That's also costing our healthcare system money. And there hasn't even been studies done on how much money is actually being saved by Insight being there. Like it's just on that one. It's just on that one blood-borne illness that we're saving that much money. How wild would it be if they went back and they took the stats and they tried to figure out exactly how much money was saved in all of these different systems? And we're also not even including coroners in that and the police investigations for when someone dies from an overdose, because police still have to investigate to see if it was intentional, to see if there was any foul play going on. And coroners still have to do their investigations as well to make sure the same thing. We're not even mentioning living rough is so hard on the body. And many cities have no loitering, no panhandling, and no tent laws, meaning if a houseless individual cannot access a shelter because the shelter is full or the shelter is so dangerous, like some shelters in some cities, Alberta, and the individuals don't feel safe accessing that shelter, or the shelter is full, they have to stay on the street. And now they're being criminalized for staying on the street. And now police are arresting them because they're on the street. And now the justice system is taking more money in housing these individuals in jails. That's what's happening. And that's not just a Canada issue, that's a United States issue as well. I come from Vegas. They just released a no loitering law in Vegas as well. And I got into it with a friend who is a police officer and was like, this makes no sense. And that friend responded to me with, well, if they're schizophrenic and they're in a mental break, they're going to do harm to others because, they're in mania. And it's like, that's exactly how you're trained as police. Like, you're not trained around the mental health fully. You're not trained around de-escalation. You're trained around controlling the situation and controlling the community. And with that control comes more harm and comes more stigmatization of mental health and of substance use. And it's all really, really dangerous and costing us a lot of money in our justice system. And no one's talking about it, which is insane to me. That entire situation is insane to me. And as we're talking about no loitering laws, let's also talk about encampments and how the police are going to these encampments and clearing people out of the encampments, okay? Because there's a lot of money to be made in that. And I don't think anyone who is of the general public knows how much money is being spent on that. So I did this research because give me all the facts. That's how I operate. It's better to have facts than not have facts. Here's some facts. Vancouver spent $550,000 in 8 days. That's a price of a house in most cities. Toronto spent $2 million in taking out encampments in 3 months. Halifax spent $33,000 in 1 month to clear out an encampment. Edmonton spent $1.7 million. That is just what the city announced. That does not include the police budget for the police to be present and to take people off site and. So that number is actually much, much larger than $1.7 million. Okay. In total, just those from last year. And I'm not even talking 3 years, 2 years, just last year, 2023. Those 4 main cities in Canada spent $4,283,000 in the span of 16 months combined. And when we're looking at that 16 months combined, what that actually breaks down to is $268,750 per month. In total, I tried looking into numbers of how many people were in these encampments, and I couldn't find exactly the amount of numbers. What I did find, though, was that some cities legitimately said it would have been cheaper just to pay these individuals rent and to get a place and put them in. And I'm gonna, in our YouTube page, we're gonna have the stats there, you know it. I'm going to show you all of that because facts are only as good as the proof that they're based on. We have receipts, right? On top of all of this, when we're talking about Insight and Insight saving so much money for Vancouver alone and our healthcare system, there was no evidence of increased rates of robbery, theft, drug-related loitering, drug-related criminal offenses. So I'm going to just repeat that. There was no increase of crime in the area that Insight operates from in the last 20 years. In fact, and this is not just Insight now, there was decreases in public injection and discarded equipment. So this whole idea of needles being on the ground is just funny because SCSs actually make it so that there's less discarded equipment, making it safer for the entire community. Switzerland, Germany, Sydney, and Vancouver all reported that. They all reported a decrease in public injection and in discarded equipment. We're not just talking about one country. We're not just even talking about one continent. This has been shown across the world to be safer for our communities. And yet the general public is in such an outcry around it and doesn't want it. We're letting stigma, preconceived notions take over hard evidence. Why are we doing that? I would argue our general population cares. I would argue our general population wants to be educated. They don't want to see houseless people because it makes them feel bad and because it can be scary. But when we as frontline workers are giving you a different truth and saying, yeah, let us do our jobs. Let us do our jobs because we will make our communities safer, because harm reduction does make our communities safer. How are you not going to let us because you're being given propaganda saying how unsafe it is when it's really not, when it's actually safer, saying how much money it costs when it's really not, it's really saving you money as a taxpayer? Like, holy. And we're just supposed to sit back and take it as frontline workers. And I'm not going to. My skills are versatile as a frontline worker. If for some reason, miraculously overnight, everyone got housed, everyone got mental health support, everyone got a substance use support, if for some reason my skills were not necessary in this sector, I would gladly move to the for-profit sector. That being said, the irony that people tell me that, we're a part of this housing complex industry because we want to keep our jobs. And because we get paid so much money and it's actually going to us and it's not going to the people we serve. I'm not in it for the money. None of us are. There is not money to be made in it, especially if you're caring, especially if you can't look away from social injustice, especially if you can't dehumanize a human. If you're incapable of doing any of those things, you are actually spending your own money in some way, shape, or form doing this work. Even if I've already exceeded my budget for meals for that month, but they're not going to have a meal for the next 3 days, I'm going to buy them a meal. That's just being human. You would buy them a meal too. Anyone would, because you know that that's community care.
So yeah, you're totally right, Tracy. I don't think frontline workers are in it for the money at all. Like, I don't. Where's this supposed money that everyone's talking about? Because I'm not seeing it. I know most of us aren't seeing it. So frontline workers aren't being paid what they deserve. The part that I wanted to talk about, kind of, yeah, is like it goes with what you were saying, Tracy. Like, I had a conversation not so long ago in a while I was taking a shared ride app in the downtown east side, and I got into a car with another community member, and when they came into the car, it was evident that they had what we call street feet. Which is very, very common in the downtown east side, unfortunately, and working in shelters and housing down there, like I could smell it instantly, and I knew instantly what it was. And I can tell the guy like was very embarrassed about it, and I tried to show him like, hey, it's okay. Like I'm like, one, I'm used to it, and like two, it's not really your fault for having street feet.
Mhm.
And the driver kind of like overheard our conversation, and when the guy with the street feet like left the car, the driver turned to me and was like, I don't understand why these people can't just keep their feet clean, and like why they're not taking care of themselves. And I'm like, well, it's kind of hard to keep your body clean and dry constantly in Vancouver weather when you're not housed. There's not enough resources out there for them to consistently keep themselves clean and dry. And the driver was like, "Well, I guess I never thought about it." And I was like, "Yeah, these things are like all these complaints about tax money being wasted and all this stuff. It's very short sighted. Like you don't consider the factors that go into why someone is going through what they're going through. Like housing is healthcare. Like you cannot have proper healthcare without proper housing. If we actually did harm reduction properly and were properly funded to do the things that we need to do to its full capacity, we would actually be saving a lot of money on the healthcare system, and not just money, but also like the pressure and the strain on the already very strained healthcare system. Mm-hmm. And I don't think people like really understand that, or because again they're short-sighted, right? Like they're seeing because harm reduction is still very taboo and very underfunded, we aren't able to keep up with what we are trying to do. Mm-hmm. Like at this point, harm reduction is, yeah, keeping people alive. But had we, from the beginning, had full funding and full, like, support around it, we would have been able to prevent wasted money. Like, does that make sense?
Yeah.
I'm giving up.
I'm giving up. It totally makes sense. And I think just to add my 2 cents in before we move on is I think that whenever, you're talking about anything, I mean, specifically we're talking about harm reduction and housing and all those sorts of pieces. I think the default is to say, well, that's where my taxpayer dollars are going, when people don't even really understand how all of that works. And especially when you're looking at housing, and with this question going into more so, this is what's my taxpayers are going towards, inflating the housing market and the housing industry and, keeping people employed in that way. And that's my hard earned dollars. I'm like, tell me you don't understand how the housing market works by telling me, you know what I mean? By saying these sorts of things. And Any little thing that you see wrong and that's happening in your life, or maybe there's some sort of financial struggle that you're having and you're looking at your taxes going out and you're thinking, oh, my taxes are paying for all these things. But I mean, that's not exactly how it works. And not all of your taxpayers' dollars are going to one specific sector, because if that were true, we wouldn't have the funding issues that we're having right now, anyways. If every single person was housed and happy and feeling good about it, you also might have a different perspective as well. And we wouldn't even be having this my tax paying dollars are going towards X, Y, and Z conversation. So,
And I think people like I don't think people are wrong for being upset about how their money is being used, because I am also upset about how my tax dollars are being used, but I'm mad about the money being used for useless short-term solutions such as the decampments, the street sweeps, when we could have been using all that money to put into supportive housing, uh, and actually like solving the problem in the long run,
yeah.
right? Like that's why I'm mad. Like you can be mad about, yeah, exactly. You can be mad about how your taxes are being used, but don't blame on the people who are being affected by these short-sighted decisions that the government are making and policymakers are making.
Well, I think misdirectional blame,
Yes.
you're instead of, pointing to the powers that be that are actually making these decisions on how taxpayers' dollars are being spent and how they could actually utilize that in a more productive way for majority of people in society, and not a select few who are benefiting and the rest are not so much.
Yeah.
They're looking at the population to be like, if you weren't here, this wouldn't be an issue.
Yeah.
And I think that's the problem and the mindset and the narrative that we need to get away from, just like collectively within society.
Yeah. So like be mad about your tax dollars being, misused, but educate yourself and look into like what the actual issue is, and don't be fooled by the media like throwing these folks under the bus and being the ones that are taking the blame for the healthcare system and our tax money being misused. Like,
Absolutely. This is a little bit of a shift in kind of what we're talking about, but I think it's an important one to talk about. Violence in this line of work, how dangerous it actually is. So, Eileen, I see, I can feel you reacting as I'm saying this. What are your thoughts on that? Your experiences? Anything that you feel comfortable sharing as well?
so violence for me in the workplace is very real. I've been physically assaulted. I've experienced verbal abuse on almost a daily basis. When you're working in the lowest barrier shelter, it is almost unavoidable. However, I would like to first and foremost highlight the underlying factors contributing to the violence perpetuated on frontline workers. Those community members have endured years, even decades, without accessing proper mental health care. Untreated mental health issues, compounded by trauma and illnesses of all sorts, can lead to folks resorting to street level drugs as a form of self medication.
Mhm.
These substances, however, only makes things worse for their mental health, pushing them further into a cycle of distress, living in a perpetual state of survival mode where basic needs like food and shelter are uncertain.
Mhm.
This adds immense strain to their already fragile mental state. It's essential to approach these situations with compassion and understanding, recognizing that these individuals are not all inherently violent, but are often victims of circumstances beyond their control. I've seen shelter intake workers get assaulted due to having to tell a community member who has been outside for days without sleep in the cold, without their basic needs met, that they cannot get a bed due to the limited numbers of bed available in the shelter. And I'm not making excuses for violent reactions, but I understand. Addressing the root causes of their struggles, such as providing access to mental health resources and stable housing, is paramount in helping them break free from this cycle of despair and aggression. To top it all off, you have frontline workers who are overworked, underpaid, understaffed, feeling unsupported, and going through compassion fatigue, unable to support unable to properly support and de-escalate situations. Staff are feeling pressured to kick community members outside in the cold and wet Vancouver weather because if we don't, we get in trouble for not doing our job. But then when you have two staff working in a shelter with over 80 people, someone has to always stay in the front office in case of, overdoses or other crises. Then I, by myself, have to go tell a community member that they cannot be inside the space and try to kick them out without any support and have to deal with a potentially violent reaction.
Like, I've experienced physical and verbal aggression. And like, truthfully, Frontline Baddies wouldn't exist if we didn't experience this type of violence in the workplace, right? And it's not always from clients either, if we're being honest. Sometimes it's police violence that we have to witness, or it's like systemic violence, right? Like active colonization. Like sometimes, and I know this might be a hot take, but sometimes the violence that we experience in this line of work, I feel like sometimes it's catastrophized by individuals who are burnt out, or maybe seeking more attention and care than they're currently getting. And they're making it really more about them and their needs than they are their clients due to their burnout. It doesn't make it okay. It gives an explanation to why some of these individuals do that. And it's hard when you have a burned out individual on a team, because it can change the entire culture of that team to be more wary and to worry more about violence than maybe they need to worry about violence, because that one individual is just in such a bad mental space. They're seeing dangers where maybe there aren't dangers because they're just that activated, right? And like, I want to honor that. I want to honor our frontline baddies who are burned out and who are in that space, because it's a hard space to encompass. And I've been in it myself. And it's a hard thing to be like, actually, I'm the problem here and I need to step away, and come back to this line of work when I'm not the problem, and when I'm fully capable of being able to support, our street baddies with where they're at. I know that the times that I've been harmed in this line of work is because I was overconfident in my skills and abilities, or in my relations with those individuals that I was working with. And I was quickly put in my place, right? And that they were humbling experiences each time. But they did blindside me. We don't maybe talk enough about the impacts that do occur to frontline workers, and how harmful those impacts can be, because it's not just like the macro incidents of physical violence or sexual violence. It's also the micro day-to-day of like, I'm gonna follow you, like, I don't like you, I hate you, and like, just wait. Like, because we get that stuff told to us all the time. Like that's a pretty common thing. If you have someone that you're serving in a really bad space, like, that can be a very common thing to occur. We don't have to expect it in this line of work. I don't think we should expect walking into work knowing that we're walking into an unsafe environment. But not to expect it is also not to be prepared for the worst case scenario. And I do believe in wanting the best and preparing for the worst. So I think it's a really delicate balance, I believe.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, with everything both of you said, especially with that last piece of preparedness. When I was working with a particular youth in a group home setting, this young person had so many needs that we were unable to meet collectively within that home. And a lot of this person's history was not provided and front loaded to staff. Staff were not given appropriate tools and training and information on helping this young person. And from that came a variety and multitude of behaviors from that. This is not me saying anything about this young person because, if I were in a very similar position and I had all these attachment needs and none of these things were being met, and I was high risk in community and using, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, I would also behave in these ways. So this is not a don't behave in these ways, but why is it that so many different agencies and so many different places where you work within frontline work, you're not given the proper tools? So not only are you going to burn out faster, but you're causing more harm and trauma to this young person that you're actually trying to help in some way. But when you're not given everything that you need in order to do so, I mean, no wonder people are burning out. No wonder violence is happening in those situations, especially when you're not able to move away, when you're in an enclosed space with a person, because that's where they're telling you need to be, or, giving you parameters and then not providing support afterwards or debriefing afterwards. I mean, I almost want to say that certain behaviors are going to be inevitable in this line of work, depending on how long you're in this line of work and what sector you're in. And I think how you handle that afterwards, how you come together as a team, how you support each other, and how you support the clients, how involved the clients are in these procedures and tools that are getting implemented and put into place is going to make all the difference in mitigating whatever type of risk is going to come in that situation.
I think it's also important to highlight that almost every job out there comes with risk, whether it's a construction worker or a harm reduction worker. Like, people get hurt on the job all the time, and I think, I don't know, make it seem like frontline work is the most dangerous job, or like that's like the reaction I get when I tell people, like, I work in the downtown east side. They're like, oh my gosh, tell me, like, is it scary? Like do you get attacked all the time? Like, it must be so scary down there. And it's like, and it's because the population that we are working with are vilified. Whereas, like, in construction, you're building homes, like, you can't blame a building if it collapses and kills people,
Also,
right?
there's like a bunch of procedures put in place to make sure that those things don't happen,
Yeah.
and that you don't cut your arm off, and that you don't fall off a building, and that you don't and.
Yeah.
So I mean,
So much of this violence is psychological, and
yes.
trying to go to, like, workers' comp around a psychological violent act can be incredibly difficult and add to it, right? And whereas, like, if we have a broken bone, we have a broken bone. Like, it makes it really hard on workers' comp to try to go through what should be approved or not, just due to the fact that a lot of the injuries we do sustain are psychological injuries and not necessarily physical injuries. But then when we do sustain physical injuries, they tend to be quite extreme. And yeah, and it is what it is. It doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it good. It's the reality of what violence looks like and the aftercare for violence. And that's why we exist. It's why Frontline Baddies exists, because we need aftercare and preventative care.
Full stop. Period.
Like, us as a society aren't acknowledging the root of it.
I mean, yeah, we're not, right? And that's what this entire episode has been about. That we're not actually addressing the issues going on. We're not addressing the propaganda. We're not addressing the facts that have been given to all of us as a community, which is why we really wanted to make this episode. Because as frontline workers, we are tired, oh, so tired of having to have these conversations with individuals who do not understand what we do, why we do it, or the facts behind it. We're tired of constantly being asked how we can do what we can do, and having the people that we care about on a daily basis villainized and devalued and dehumanized. We're tired of having these political discussions in our home lives, in our social lives. We want a break from it. As a frontline worker, if you are hearing this, I highly suggest to send it to anyone who you've had issues with in the past around these politics. so that they can go through and they can be more informed. And so you're not wasting your precious time and energy doing that. It is why we have created this episode. We are not going to be doing a debrief of this episode just due to the self-care each of us had to put into place afterwards. This episode took us 2 different days of filming because it is hard. And these myths and the stigma impacts each of us due to our own neurodivergences and our history of substance use or houselessness. We hope that you can use this video so that your energy in the future is not drained by others. We hope you have found it helpful and educational. And please, if you need to self-care or if you need to send, us a message on Instagram after hearing this because what you heard just hit really hard, go for it. For all of our listeners who are listening through like Spotify and you're maybe not actually seeing the video that I've worked really hard to put together, I just wanted to let y'all know that you should visit us at our website, frontlinebaddies.com. If you're a frontline worker, become a member. It's free. Join the page. We have a bunch of different groups where we talk about different things right now. As for all of the other socials, follow us at Frontline Baddies, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. Much love to every frontline worker out there because you need it. Y'all are making everyone's communities a safer place, and we want to validate that. We hope that these episodes are validating and that you don't feel so lonely doing this work because we know how lonely it can get. We see you, we hear you, we get you. Thank you for your time.